My world shattered not with a bang, but with a stiff, cream-colored envelope. I remember the weight of it in my hand, heavier than any bill I'd ever opened, and the perfectly embossed HOA logo that promised order and belonging, yet felt, in that moment, like a brand of impending doom. It was late 2023, the crisp Denver autumn air already hinting at winter's bite, but the chill that ran through me had nothing to do with the weather. It was the icy grip of fear squeezing my chest, a primal dread that whispered of everything I had built, however modest, being swept away in an instant. The faint scent of expensive paper and a hint of something sterile, like a doctor's office, seemed to emanate from the envelope itself, a harbinger of the clinical destruction it contained, and a knot began to tighten in my stomach even before my fingers tore at the seal. My name is Marcus Thorne, and at 48, a divorced landscaper with dirt perpetually under his fingernails and the scent of freshly cut grass clinging to his clothes, I thought I understood the rhythms of life, the quiet hum of suburban existence in my modest townhouse. After the divorce, this place, small as it was, had become my sanctuary. A patch of earth I could call my own, where I tended a meticulous backyard garden, a personal rebellion against the manicured uniformity the homeowners association so zealously enforced. My hands, calloused from years of working the soil, found solace in the tangible act of nurturing life, a quiet contrast to the intangible losses I'd endured. And this home, this small rectangle of stability, was all I had left to anchor myself against the tide of life's uncertainties. The community itself, at first glance, was a picture postcard of upscale Denver living. Manicured lawns, mature trees, children's laughter echoing from playgrounds. But beneath that polished surface, a rot had festered, unseen and unheard, until that thick envelope landed on my porch, demanding not just attention, but a soul-crushing $100,000. The letter, cool and formal, outlined a special assessment for undisclosed infrastructure repairs, a phrase so vague it felt deliberately opaque, designed to deter questions rather than invite understanding. It wasn't a request, it was a decree, backed by a chilling threat of foreclosure if the astronomical sum wasn't paid within 90 days. $100,000. My hands trembled as I reread the figure, my vision blurring at the edges. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. Certainly more than I had saved. The notion was absurd, a cruel joke played by an unseen hand, but the signature at the bottom, crisp and elegant, belonged to Cynthia Vance, the formidable, impeccably coiffed president of our HOA board. A woman whose life, I knew, was as far removed from financial struggle as the distant mountains were from my small, struggling business. I could almost hear her perfectly modulated voice, dripping with saccharine condescension, as I imagined her dictating this devastating demand, her complete lack of empathy for the lives she was about to upend, a thought that brought a bitter bile to my throat. Cynthia Vance was, in many ways, the embodiment of the community's aspirational facade. She lived in one of the sprawling mansions that bordered the golf course, a stone's throw from my modest townhouse, but a world away in terms of perceived status and wealth. Her sprawling property, with its meticulously sculpted hedges and three-car garage always housing a gleaming luxury vehicle, seemed to mock my own humble abode, a constant reminder of the chasm between our realities. Her life, glimpsed through the tinted windows of her luxury SUV or at the infrequent, tightly controlled HOA meetings, seemed to glide effortlessly from expensive luncheons at exclusive clubs to exotic vacations that she occasionally and casually mentioned in passing. She carried herself with an air of unshakable authority, a kind of regal entitlement that suggested she was less a community representative and more a benevolent dictator. Her every pronouncement delivered with an unyielding finality that stifled dissent before it could even form. I'd always found her unsettling, her smile a little too wide, her eyes a little too cold, but I dismissed it as the usual power dynamic of a community leader, never imagining the insidious rot that festered beneath her polished veneer, a rot that was now threatening to consume my entire world. I spent the next few days in a fog, the demand for $100,000 a constant, throbbing pain behind my eyes. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, my nights filled with anxious calculations and imagined scenarios of eviction, of losing the only true home I had left. The scent of my own garden, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to mock me with its ephemeral beauty, a beauty I might soon be forced to abandon. I walked the neighborhood, my usual morning ritual, transformed into a frantic search for visible signs of this alleged infrastructure catastrophe. I saw the same cracked sidewalks I'd always seen, the same worn-out asphalt on the main thoroughfares, the same slightly listing mailbox posts. Nothing, absolutely nothing screamed $100,000 emergency, let alone a $4 million one, which is what the sum would amount to if every homeowner, even those in smaller units like mine, was hit with such an assessment. A bitter taste filled my mouth. This wasn't about repairs. This was something else, something far more sinister. And the pit in my stomach deepened with each passing hour, a chilling realization that gnawed at my peace. My first attempt at understanding was a phone call to the HOA office, a sterile, hushed space tucked away in a corner of the community center. The air there always felt recycled, thick with unspoken regulations and the faint scent of cleaning products. A receptionist, whose voice was as bland as the beige walls, informed me that all information regarding the special assessment has been disseminated via mail and that no further details are available at this time. Her tone was clipped, dismissive, as if my questions were an inconvenience, an interruption to the seamless operation of their opaque empire. She barely let me finish my sentence, her voice a practiced monotone, designed to shut down inquiry, not invite it, and it only fueled the fire building within me. This wasn't just bureaucracy. It was a wall, deliberately erected, and I could feel the insult in every perfectly articulated syllable, a stark testament to their contempt for legitimate concerns. I tried calling Cynthia directly. Her assistant, a woman with a voice like polished chrome, informed me Mrs. Vance was unavailable for private consultations regarding community matters, and that I should direct all inquiries to the official HOA channels. There was a subtle sneer in the assistant's voice, a barely concealed disdain for anyone daring to question the established order. Each refusal, each deflection, felt like a deliberate act of psychological warfare, chipping away at my resolve, but instead, it only hardened it. The message was clear. My voice, my concerns, my very solvency meant nothing to them. This outright dismissal, the casual disregard for the financial ruin they were inflicting, ignited a spark of anger that slowly began to eclipse my fear. They expected me to simply roll over to accept my fate, and that was something I, Marcus Thorne, a man who had built his life on hard work and self-reliance, simply could not do, not while the threat of losing everything loomed so large. The next HOA meeting, held in the community center's cavernous ballroom, was a tense, suffocating affair. The air was thick with unspoken anxieties, the collective fear of hundreds of homeowners palpable as they exchanged nervous glances, whispers dying as Cynthia Vance took the stage. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to amplify the silence, and the clatter of chairs as people settled was unnervingly loud. She was resplendent in a tailored silk suit, her silver hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun, radiating an aura of untouchable authority, a diamond brooch gleaming at her throat, a stark contrast to the worried faces in the crowd. Her opening remarks were a masterclass in obfuscation, a blizzard of corporate jargon about fiscal responsibility and preserving community values, while completely sidestepping the actual substance of the $100,000 assessment. Her eyes, as she scanned the room, seemed to bypass anyone who looked less than affluent, dismissing their potential concerns before they were even voiced. Her gaze sweeping over the worried faces as if they were mere inconveniences, rather than the very people she was meant to serve. When the floor opened for questions, a timid elderly woman, Mrs. Henderson, from down the street, raised a trembling hand, her voice barely a whisper, as she asked about the specifics of the repairs. Cynthia offered a condescending smile, a practiced gesture that didn't quite reach her eyes. "My dear, these are complex infrastructure projects. You wouldn't understand the nuances of geotechnical stabilization or advanced drainage systems." A ripple of discomfort, not understanding, went through the room. I felt my own hand shoot up, my voice, when it came, surprisingly steady, cutting through the stifling quiet. "Mrs. Vance," I began, my voice clear and firm, "many of us are facing financial ruin because of this assessment. We have a right to detailed line-item breakdowns, competitive bids, and proof that these repairs are even necessary. Why can't we see the financial records? A gasp, almost imperceptible, went through the room, a collective holding of breath as everyone turned to watch the impending confrontation. Cynthia's smile vanished, replaced by a steely glint in her eyes. Her perfectly manicured hand tightened on the podium. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice dropping a fraction of a tone, now laced with a dangerous edge, "the HOA board, in its collective wisdom, has deemed these repairs essential. Our financial records are proprietary and available for review by appointment only, under strict conditions. Your insinuations are disruptive and unhelpful." Her tone was a thinly veiled threat, a public shaming designed to silence me. And I felt the eyes of every homeowner in the room turn towards me, some with curiosity, others with fear, but all of them now aware that something deeply wrong was unfolding, that a battle line had been drawn, and I was standing on one side of it, alone. I wouldn't back down. Not when my home, my future, was on the line. Not when I could feel the silent pleas of my neighbors urging me on. The following week, refusing to be intimidated, I submitted a formal, written request for the HOA's detailed financial records, citing the bylaws. I wanted everything: vendor contracts, invoices, bank statements, meeting minutes from the last 5 years. I half expected them to deny it, to find some obscure clause to block my access, but surprisingly, they agreed, albeit with an exasperating caveat. I could review the documents, but only at the HOA office, during business hours, under the supervision of an administrative assistant, and I was forbidden from making copies or taking photos. It was a clear attempt to make the process as arduous and discouraging as possible, a gauntlet thrown, and I knew in that moment that they were trying to hide something significant, which only strengthened my resolve to uncover it, the game now overtly afoot. Days turned into weeks, my landscaping business taking a back seat as I dedicated every spare moment to the dimly lit HOA conference room, poring over stacks of binders that smelled faintly of dust and old paper. The stale air in the room felt heavy, the silence broken only by the rustle of pages and the distant hum of the building's HVAC system. The administrative assistant, a nervous young man named Kevin, sat across from me, scrolling through his phone, pointedly ignoring my existence, occasionally glancing up with a mixture of boredom and vague apprehension, as if he knew something he shouldn't. The records were a labyrinth of numbers, acronyms, and vague descriptions. Initially, it was just a blur of data, countless pages of expenditure that seemed to swallow up any real meaning, but slowly, painstakingly, as I forced my tired eyes to focus, patterns began to emerge. Vendor names kept repeating, but their addresses were often P.O. boxes or residential homes in other states, sometimes even just empty storefronts when I cross-referenced them online. Contracts for seemingly identical services had wildly different price tags, often with the higher bids awarded to the less established-looking companies. The sheer volume of consulting fees and administrative overheads was staggering. An opaque black hole swallowing vast sums of money, and a cold certainty began to settle in my bones. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was a deliberate, calculated scheme, and the realization sent a shiver down my spine, chilling me more than any Denver winter ever could. One afternoon, a specific set of invoices snagged my attention, pulling me deeper into the rabbit hole. A company called Horizon Solutions LLC had billed the HOA for a staggering sum to resurface community roads. Yet I'd driven those roads every day for years, and while they were patched, they certainly hadn't been resurfaced. The asphalt remained cracked and uneven in many places, a testament to neglect, not a $500,000 overhaul. Digging deeper, I found another invoice for advanced landscape design, for an overhaul of the community common areas, but the improvements were minimal, mostly touch-ups I could have done myself for a fraction of the cost. The grand promises in the invoice descriptions bore no resemblance to the visible reality, and a cold anger began to simmer within me. The names of these companies felt almost deliberately generic, designed to blend into a list of legitimate vendors, to pass unnoticed. But my gut told me something was deeply wrong, and the truth I suspected was hidden just beneath the surface of these innocuous-sounding entities, waiting to be unearthed. I spent my evenings cross-referencing company names with public records, searching state business registries and real estate databases for my small home office. The glow of my laptop screen illuminating the deepening lines of fatigue around my eyes. The pieces began to fall into place with a horrifying clarity that made my blood run cold. Horizon Solutions LLC was registered to a small, nondescript office suite in a strip mall miles away, but its primary contact address, unearthed from obscure public documents, was listed as a sprawling luxury condo downtown, owned by none other than Arthur Finch, our HOA treasurer, a man whose quiet demeanor at meetings had masked a ravenous greed. Advanced landscape design, similarly, traced back to a lakeside property registered to Eleanor Rourke, the HOA secretary, a woman who always complimented Cynthia's fashion choices. The shell companies I'd read about in true crime documentaries weren't some distant, shadowy concept. They were right here, in my community, operated by the very people sworn to protect its interests, and the blood ran cold in my veins as the enormity of the betrayal crashed over me, leaving me gasping for air in the sudden, sickening realization of how deeply I and everyone else had been fooled. Over 5 years, from 2018 to 2023, these supposed special assessments and bloated regular homeowner dues had funneled millions into these secretly owned businesses. They weren't just siphoning money, they were bleeding the community dry, using our hard-earned cash to fund their extravagant lifestyles. The true infrastructure of the community, the cracked roads I'd walked, the leaky roofs on the common facilities, the neglected landscaping, all suffered while Cynthia Vance and her cohorts accumulated wealth, their mansions growing ever larger, their vacations ever more exotic. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just facing a $100,000 debt. I was a victim of a multi-million-dollar fraud perpetrated by my neighbors, the very people I had implicitly trusted, and the profound feeling of betrayal twisted in my gut, a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth that lingered long after the initial shock. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. My mind raced, trying to think of who could possibly help me untangle such a sophisticated web of deceit, a maze constructed by cunning and avarice. A local investigative journalist, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, came to mind. Her byline had appeared on several hard-hitting pieces about local corruption, and her reputation for tenacious reporting preceded her. I remembered a particular series she had done on a city council scandal, her prose sharp and unflinching. I found her contact information and, with a mix of trepidation and desperate hope, sent her a guarded email hinting at significant financial irregularities within a prominent HOA, careful not to reveal too much, but enough to pique a professional interest. I didn't hold out much hope. Journalists must get hundreds of tips, many of them false alarms or unsubstantiated claims. But the next morning, her reply pinged in my inbox, surprisingly quick and direct. She wanted to meet, and she wanted to meet that day. And a flicker of hope, fragile but persistent, ignited in the darkness. A tiny spark promising a way out of the suffocating gloom. Our first meeting was in a quiet coffee shop, far from the watchful eyes of the community, tucked away in a bustling downtown district. The aroma of roasted coffee beans filled the air, a small comfort against the enormity of the secret I was about to share. Sarah was sharper than her kind eyes suggested, her gaze intelligent and probing, missing nothing. She wore a simple, practical jacket, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, radiating an aura of quiet competence. I laid out everything: the terror of the 100K demand, my mounting suspicions, the meticulous review of the financial records, the chilling discovery of the shell companies, the names of Finch and Rourke, and the undeniable links to Cynthia Vance. She listened, her expression unreadable, occasionally scribbling notes in a small, leather-bound notebook, her pen scratching softly on the paper, the only sound apart from the low murmur of other patrons. When I finished, the silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the clinking of coffee cups. "This is big, Marcus," she finally said, her voice low, almost a whisper, but firm. "If you're right, this isn't just a local story, it's a federal case. Embezzlement, wire fraud, possibly racketeering. But we need hard proof, forensic accounting proof." Her words, sober and realistic, confirmed the magnitude of what I had stumbled upon, and I knew there was no turning back now, that I had found an ally, and that our fight had truly just begun. Sarah introduced me to David Chen, a forensic accountant with a reputation for untangling complex financial crimes, a man renowned for his ability to follow money where others saw only confusion. David was a quiet, meticulous man, his glasses perched low on his nose, his brain a finely tuned machine for dissecting ledgers and tracing invisible money trails. He greeted me with a brief, professional nod, his eyes already scanning the boxes of documents I'd brought. I handed over everything I had managed to gather, the invoices, the company names, the addresses, my handwritten notes filled with suspicious observations. He dove into the data with a quiet intensity, his silence punctuated by an occasional hum or a sharp intake of breath as he processed a particularly egregious discrepancy. Over the next few weeks, as David meticulously peeled back layers of deceit, the picture grew clearer and far more damning. He uncovered not just inflated contracts, but phantom projects, services billed but never rendered, and a dizzying array of offshore accounts linked to shell companies that in turn traced back to Finch, Rourke, and most significantly, Cynthia Vance herself. He showed me diagrams he'd painstakingly constructed, a tangled web of deceit that was breathtaking in its complexity, yet brutally simple in its predatory intent. The extent of their greed was breathtaking. Over $4 million siphoned from the community's coffers. $4 million that should have gone to maintaining the integrity of our homes, our shared spaces, now funding private jets, luxury cars, and lavish renovations on their already opulent mansions. David found a transfer of $500,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands, just weeks after a special assessment for a new community clubhouse roof that had never materialized, the money evaporating into thin air while residents were told the project was simply delayed. He unearthed recorded phone calls where Cynthia, her voice dripping with intimidation, coerced legitimate contractors into inflating bids, only to then pass over their companies for those she secretly owned, ensuring their complicity through veiled threats or promises of future inflated work. The evidence was piling up, concrete and irrefutable, painting a devastating portrait of sophisticated, calculated fraud, and the anger I felt was a cold, steady flame, burning away any last vestiges of my fear, replaced now by a singular, unyielding determination to see justice done. The investigation became my life. My days were a blur of yard work, my evenings consumed by the clandestine meetings with Sarah and David. We formed an unlikely clandestine team, meeting late at night in Sarah's small, cluttered office or in anonymous hotel lobbies, exchanging encrypted messages, working in the shadows while the fraudsters continued their brazen charade in plain sight. Each new piece of evidence we uncovered was a victory, but also a fresh stab of betrayal, knowing these people were still living lavishly on our stolen funds. We meticulously compiled a dossier, cross-referencing every detail, every fraudulent transaction, every lie. Sarah leveraged her network, confirming anonymous tips from former HOA staff who had been too afraid to come forward, their whispered testimonies adding crucial context to the cold numbers. We even found internal HOA meeting minutes where votes were clearly manipulated, and legitimate concerns about infrastructure were dismissed with a wave of Cynthia's hand, the hypocrisy blatant and sickening. The puzzle pieces fit together perfectly, forming a horrifying mosaic of corruption, and the sheer audacity of their actions fueled my determination to expose them, to tear down their gilded facade. The moment we decided to take the evidence to the authorities was both exhilarating and terrifying. It was a point of no return. We weren't just reporting suspicious activity, we were accusing powerful individuals of federal crimes, crimes that carried serious prison sentences. The weight of that decision pressed down on me, a heavy burden of responsibility, but also a fierce resolve. There was a palpable tension in the air as we walked into the U.S. Attorney's office, carrying boxes overflowing with documents, financial spreadsheets, and recorded conversations, each box a testament to months of painstaking, often frustrating work. The prosecutor, a seasoned veteran with a weary but sharp gaze named Mark Davies, listened intently as David presented his forensic analysis, Sarah detailed her journalistic findings, and I, my voice shaking slightly despite my efforts to control it, recounted my personal journey from threatened homeowner to reluctant investigator. His initial skepticism slowly gave way to a grim recognition as he saw the clear pattern of sophisticated fraud, the institutional corruption at its heart. He recognized the weight of the evidence. He looked at me, his expression grave, and simply said, "Mr. Thorne, you've done something extraordinary. We're going to pursue this." The relief that washed over me was immense, a wave breaking after a long, arduous struggle, but I knew this was just the beginning of a long, arduous fight, a public battle that would demand every ounce of my courage. The legal process moved with agonizing slowness, a deliberate, intricate dance of grand juries, indictments, and pretrial motions. Each stage felt like another hurdle, another opportunity for them to escape. Cynthia Vance and her two closest board members, Arthur Finch and Eleanor Rourke, were finally indicted on multiple federal counts: wire fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. The news ripped through our seemingly placid community like a hurricane, shattering the carefully constructed facade of order and civility. Neighbors whispered, then openly discussed, the shocking allegations, their hushed tones giving way to outrage and disbelief. Suddenly, the crumbling roads, the neglected community pool, the shoddy landscaping, all took on a new, sinister meaning. A class-action civil lawsuit was also filed on behalf of all defrauded homeowners, seeking not just restitution, but accountability for the profound damage inflicted, a demand for justice on behalf of everyone who had been wronged. The trial itself was a spectacle, a high-profile federal case that drew local and even national media attention, the kind of story that captivated headlines and sparked outrage. The courthouse became a magnet for news vans and curious onlookers, a stark contrast to the quiet suburban streets the scandal had originated from. The buzz of reporters and cameras, a jarring intrusion into the solemn halls of justice. Cynthia Vance, in her tailored suits and pearls, maintained an air of haughty defiance, her face a mask of indignation, as if the entire proceedings were a personal insult to her impeccable character. She carried herself with an almost regal disdain for the charges, her very posture proclaiming her innocence, her eyes often sweeping the courtroom with an expression of barely concealed contempt. She embodied the narcissistic belief that she was above reproach, entitled to control and exploit the community's funds for her personal gain. Her very presence a constant reminder of the betrayal, and seeing her there, so unrepentant, stoked the fires of my resolve. My testimony was difficult, emotional, raw. I sat on the stand, facing the jury, the weight of their gaze heavy upon me, and recounted every detail. The terror of the $100,000 demand, the weeks spent sifting through fraudulent documents, the chilling discovery of the shell companies, the profound sense of betrayal. My voice, though strained, carried the weight of hundreds of victimized homeowners, their silent suffering echoing in my words. I described the fear of losing my home, the sleepless nights, the anxiety that gnawed at my stomach, the anger at the exploitation, the feeling of powerlessness against what had seemed an untouchable authority. I talked about how the community's infrastructure had crumbled, how property values had been depressed, how the trust between neighbors had been irrevocably shattered, leaving behind a wound that would take years to heal. I saw nods of understanding among the jurors, a few dabbing at their eyes, and I knew in that moment that they had heard me, truly heard me, and my voice had finally been heard, not just by them, but by an entire community awaiting justice. David Chen, the forensic accountant, then took the stand, transforming complex financial data into a damning narrative that even a layperson could understand. With meticulous precision, he walked the jury through the intricate web of shell companies, inflated contracts, and offshore transfers. He displayed charts and graphs, meticulously illustrating how millions of dollars had flowed from homeowner dues into the personal accounts of Vance, Finch, and Rourke. A clear, undeniable flow of stolen wealth. He showed the phony invoices, the phantom projects, the calculated deceit, each piece of evidence a nail in the coffin of their lies. Cynthia Vance, seated at the defense table, sneered, occasionally whispering to her attorney, attempting to dismiss David's detailed exposé as a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of complex business dealings. But the evidence was overwhelming, an unassailable mountain of truth, and her arrogant denials only served to highlight her guilt, painting her as a remorseless manipulator, her face hardening with each damning revelation. The defense, predictable in its arrogance, tried to paint me as a disgruntled, financially strapped homeowner with a vendetta, and David Chen as an overzealous accountant looking for a big score, trying to discredit our motives and our findings. They attempted to muddy the waters, introducing tangential arguments and questioning the chain of custody for documents, but their arguments withered under the weight of the prosecution's irrefutable evidence. Cynthia Vance, during her own testimony, remained utterly unrepentant, her voice dripping with indignation, portraying herself as a benevolent community leader unfairly targeted. She spoke of her sacrifices for the neighborhood, of her vision, but her words rang hollow, devoid of any genuine emotion, unable to mask the cold, hard facts presented against her, the lies crumbling around her like the neglected foundations she had presided over. After days of intense testimony, the jury retired and the waiting began. Every minute felt like an hour, every hour a day. The community held its breath, a collective pause as the fate of our justice hung in the balance. I sat in the courtroom, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles ached, replaying every word, every piece of evidence, every knowing glance exchanged between jurors. Had we done enough? Had the truth truly been heard above the noise of their carefully constructed deceit? The tension in the room was a living, breathing thing, growing thicker with each passing moment, and the weight of it threatened to crush me, the outcome of so many lives hanging precariously in the balance. Then, the summons came. The jury had reached a verdict. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the courtroom, a silence broken only by the shuffle of feet and the quiet murmurs of the gathered press. As the foreperson read the verdicts, a wave of relief, so profound it almost brought me to my knees, washed over me. Cynthia Vance was found guilty on all criminal counts: wire fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. Arthur Finch and Eleanor Rourke were also found guilty. The sense of vindication was immense, overwhelming, a release of years of fear, anger, and betrayal that had been coiled tight within me, and a quiet cheer erupted from the public gallery, quickly hushed by the bailiffs. The sentencing came weeks later. Cynthia Vance, stripped of her composure, her face pale and drawn, her usual tailored elegance replaced by a brittle, defensive posture, received a sentence of 10 years in federal prison. Finch and Rourke were each sentenced to 5 years. The judge, in his stern pronouncement, also ordered them to repay $5 million in restitution, the $4 million they had stolen, plus an additional $1 million to cover damages and extensive legal costs. Their assets were immediately frozen, their sprawling mansions, symbols of their ill-gotten gains, now destined for forced sale to repay the very community they had so callously exploited. A fitting end to their reign of avarice. The scandal exploded across national news. Investigative journalism series picked up the story. Major media outlets covered the sensational details of suburban tyranny and multi-million-dollar HOA fraud, shining a harsh spotlight on an issue often hidden in plain sight. Our community, once a symbol of quiet affluence, became a national emblem of HOA corruption, a cautionary tale of unchecked power. Cynthia Vance, Arthur Finch, and Eleanor Rourke, once pillars of our community, saw their carefully constructed reputations utterly destroyed, their names forever linked to greed and betrayal, becoming pariahs in the very society they had sought to exploit. And me, Marcus Thorne, the landscaper who dared to look closer, I was hailed as a community hero, an unlikely champion who had stood up against injustice. And the weight of that title, while humbling, felt strangely right, a testament to the unexpected strength found in desperation. The $5 million recovered from the frozen assets and forced sale of the convicted board members' properties created a powerful fund. It was immediately earmarked for the long-overdue infrastructure repairs. The cracked roads that now saw steady streams of construction vehicles, the leaky roofs on the common facilities, the neglected common areas finally getting the attention they deserved. Slowly, painstakingly, the community began to heal, piece by piece, brick by brick, the scars of neglect slowly giving way to fresh asphalt and newly planted gardens. Homeowners received reimbursements for their unjustly paid special assessments, a small but significant act of restoration, a tangible symbol of justice delivered, and the quiet murmur of gratitude among neighbors became a balm to my weary soul. But for me, justice wasn't just about punishment and financial recovery. It was about systemic change. I couldn't stand by and watch other communities suffer the same fate. Fueled by the searing memory of my own struggle, I founded HOA Watchdog, a national nonprofit dedicated to advocating for stricter HOA financial transparency laws. We established an online resource, a safe haven for homeowners across the country to report suspected fraud, share information, and find support, a beacon for those who felt powerless. The early days were challenging, filled with paperwork and late nights, but the countless stories of other frustrated homeowners fueled my resolve. The fight was far from over, but the spark of my own betrayal had ignited a movement, a nationwide demand for accountability. Legislative changes began to ripple through several states, making it harder for corrupt boards to operate in the shadows, creating a legacy that transcended my personal ordeal. A testament to the fact that even profound pain can be forged into powerful purpose. My quiet townhouse no longer felt like a place of dread. It was a home again, a testament to resilience, a reminder that even the smallest voice can shake the foundations of corruption. The fear had receded, replaced by a quiet strength, a sense of purpose I hadn't known I possessed. The divorce had taken so much from me, leaving me adrift, but this fight, this unexpected battle for justice, had given me something far more profound. A renewed belief in the power of one individual to stand against overwhelming odds, to shine a light into the darkest corners, and to reclaim what was lost. The memory of Cynthia Vance's arrogant sneer still lingered, a bitter aftertaste, but it was overshadowed by the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the predator had become the prey. Her opulent reign reduced to a prison cell, her lavish lifestyle exchanged for steel bars. The sun now set differently over the community, casting long, honest shadows, and as I tended my garden, the scent of damp earth and growing things filled my lungs, a tangible reminder that even after the deepest betrayal, life and justice always find a way to bloom. My hands, once trembling with fear, now worked the soil with a renewed sense of purpose, planting seeds not just for flowers, but for a fairer future. Knowing that somewhere, another homeowner, emboldened by my story, was finally daring to question, to demand, to fight